Hey everybody, Rob Hunden here, CEO of Hunden Partners, and today I'm going to be talking to you about developer solicitation and selection processes, and honestly, the right way to go through them. There are so many ways that we have seen our potential clients and others go through these problems when they didn't need to, simply because they didn't have the right advice, they didn't understand how the process works and what it takes to be successful. The whole purpose of going through solicitation and selection process for developers is to have a competitive process that gets the best results for the community and for the development and for the taxpayer. And so nothing can be left to chance, and everything should be locked down, including communication, including your studies, your homework, knowing how you're going to finance this. So let's sort of walk through it. In our placemaking process, if you have looked at that, there are three major buckets or phases to that process. The first phase is, who do you want to be? The first part of the placemaking process, that is placemaking action plans and strategic efforts to assess what you have, what don't you have, what do you want, right? From there, you have some ideas that come out of that, and then you go into deep dive feasibility studies. But a lot of people that don't know any better say like, hey, we know what we want, we're just gonna put an RFP out for it. Well, what if you don't have the land? What if you haven't done your homework? All those things are disastrous for this process. You have to understand that you are putting something of value out there from the taxpayer to the private sector, and for that you have to be a fiduciary. You have to treat it with the absolute care that it deserves. So the first thing is, if you have an idea that you want to explore that idea. Hire an advisory firm like Hunden to go through the process of understanding what's the viability of that project, right? So market viability and financial viability. Most of the cool things you want are not feasible for the private sector. So do not think, so that's the number one mistake, is that something that's cool and different that you really want, that some other community has, guess what? It probably didn't happen just because somebody in the marketplace said, hey, let me build that, I'm gonna make a bunch of money. Most of these projects don't make a bunch of money. In fact, often they lose money, or they make just enough to get by, but they need public sector or other support, or maybe a nonprofit or a charitable organization put some money into it. These are things that don't just pop up out of the ground because there's a market need. They're very expensive, and there's a reason that you don't see them popping up all over the place. Do your homework. Are they viable? What is the feasibility gap that you're going to need to fill? Are you going to have to pay for this whole thing by yourself? If so, we've got to figure that out, right? We also need to know, what's the economic rationale for this? So does it put off the taxes, jobs, and spending in the community, net new to the community, that are going to benefit you? If so, then there's rationale for the project. What about site? We have situations where clients come to us and they say, oh, we have a developer that has this site. We have other sites. Guess what? If you're going to retain control and leverage your position to create the best project possible, you really need to have as much ownership and control of that land as possible. The first question we get from developers when we are talking about going through a developer solicitation and selection process for any kind of project is, does the client or city own the land, or the authority own the land and control it? If not, we're not going to play ball, because you can't offer something that you don't own and control, right? That's actually illegal in most places to do that. You can RFQ it, but you can't RFP it because you don't own it or control it. And if you're trying to do it on behalf of another owner or developer, that gets very sticky, and those things can go on forever because you just don't have a lot of leverage other than the incentives. But if you don't control the land, you're in bad shape. So do your studies, have the land, figure out how you're going to finance the feasibility gap. So when you finance the feasibility gap, you're going to figure out a game plan for creative financing. You're not going to just wing it and put out an RFQ or P without knowing how you're going to do that. The next phase in the pre-development process is to understand the creative financing tools that you have available to you and come up with ways that you're going to creatively fund the incentives in this project so you can attract developers, because they're going to bring whatever private capital they can to it that the financials justify and rationalize. You have to bring the rest, and they're not going to come unless you've demonstrated that you can do that. So that's the next thing you have to do, is figure out what's the project, what's it cost, what's the land, how are we going to fund the feasibility gap, and now we can go out for a developer RFQ. The other thing we also need to do is we need to get political buy-in. You may have figured out your plan of finance creatively. If you don't get political buy-in from your council or other folks that approve these things in your community or your authority or whatever, you can hit a buzzsaw. We've had clients that thought they had figured out a way to do it, but they hadn't gotten approval from council, and so they went ahead and went through a whole RFQ&P process, found a developer and all that. Council did not agree with the way of financing it, and there was a whole battle that went on for another year plus to figure out how this was going to get financed. It did end up working out, but it took an extra year. So get your tacit, at least, approvals first. You don't have to put out the dollar amounts, but the concept is really important. So finally, then you go into your RFQ&P process. Now, why do we do a Q before a P? I've got a whole video on that. It's a dating game. You are trying to attract the best mate for your project with the most qualified group that's out there that has done this before and proven success. So you both are putting your best assets out there, great pictures of each other, but even better, it's not just about looks, it's about the stuff behind the fluff, right? So we need to understand, have they done this before? What are their references? Who were the people involved? How did they creatively finance their end of it? Were they good partners to work with? All of these things. The Q first is important because it allows groups to look at your project and opportunity without going all in. Going all in without any understanding of who else the players are, and if there's any political connectivity, if there's teaming that needs to happen, anything like that is absolutely critical for these folks to understand. So they're not just going to submit a huge proposal that takes tens of thousands of dollars of time and effort and architectural drawings and budgeting and pro formas and market analysis and all that. You have to do something that is easy for them to get to know you while indicating their interest while they assess you, and you have a chance to assess them. So a Q has to be done first if we're looking for developers. We call that the throw your hat in the ring part of it. They throw their hat in the ring with everybody else. Then you can and should and really must shortlist down to just 3 or 4 finalists, and you really need to kick out any of those who are not qualified, especially those who are local and connected who are not qualified, because if any of those sail through into the finals, and it is found out by those who are qualified and from out of town, those folks will self-select themselves out because they're going to smell a rat and they're going to say, this is going to go to some locally connected group that is not as experienced as we are, and so we don't have a chance, and that's BS. And so they will self-select themselves out. You're going to end up with the crappy ones who are local and not qualified to do this, and that's why you go through this process. So don't do that, right? Get rid of those. Right? That's the whole purpose of a qualifications-based process, is to eliminate based on qualifications. Then you go into requests for proposals. You let those know you have a 1 in 3 or a 1 in 4 chance. It's only the most qualified. We're gonna, again, represent the taxpayer and the community best by getting only the best qualified groups to move through the process. And then you go into the proposal request, which goes into the drawings and budgets and pro formas and requests for incentives. Once you've ranked those groups, you don't select, you rank just in case the top ranked one falls out. So then you're gonna have the term sheet, which lays out the basic terms of the deal. That usually takes 30, 60, sometimes 90 days to get through that process, so that you have basically the terms with the top ranked group that you can then move into an actual development agreement. And so those are the major steps. Again, so many ways this can go wrong. Do your homework, get your studies done, own and control the site that you are going to be offering. Do a Q first, get political approvals ahead of time, or at least tacit approvals, and figure out your creative financing for the incentives, and make sure those all get sort of the approvals behind the scenes, so that you're completely bulletproof and you have all the answers that you need when you go out to find a developer team for your project. So for today, that's it. This has been a long one, but it's very important that you do this. And of course, Hunden Partners is your advisor all along the way. And one of the things that we do is we beat the bushes to make sure that everybody that is qualified for this kind of development, which is very specialized, so there aren't that many, whether it's a headquarters hotel or a youth sports complex or whatever, they're just really about a handful, 6, 10, 12, 14 around North America for most of these kinds of projects that can pull these off. So we contact about 300 folks to make sure we're not missing anybody. But that's the other value of having an advisor, is making sure you don't miss any steps, making sure you don't run into a buzzsaw, but also beating the bushes to push this out there, because just issuing a press release or an RFQ out into the ether is not going to do it. You've got to have people who know these folks and have done market testing and market sounding during the feasibility study, which is another key part of the process, to find out, is this something that people would be interested in the first place? You don't want to base a huge development on hopes and dreams and wishes, right? So you've got to have your market sounding, beating the bushes by the advisors, and all of those things. And that's what Hunden does for you. And so we can't wait to help you on your next project. Until next time, keep making great places.